are a go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is a guest that I met at this year's LA Festival of Books. Now, our guest today is a published author of the generational series Sparrow Wars in the Garden of Bliss, a Barre Family Saga, and other books. And the book that we'll be talking into question is, of course, this book as well as the others in the series. The author enjoys history, books, travel, and is an accomplished artist and educator in the fine arts. She spends a considerable amount of time researching, honing her craft skills, and writing most days. Then daily enjoys spare moments of reflection and creative artistic endeavors, book design, drawing, quilting, knitting, crochet, cooking, playing instruments, singing, and best of all, reading an engaging book. Also, she cherishes time with her loving spouse and feline muse companion, and I'm so excited to have her here. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's author, C.A. Portnellus, otherwise known as Cris. Cris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gabriel. I appreciate that, and I look forward to our chat this morning.
Awesome, Cris. Awesome. So before we dive deeper into your background as an author, would you like to give our viewers a little teaser into your series that we'll be talking about today?
A teaser. I have a lot of books already. Actually, the series is ultimately planned out for 13 books. 9 of those have been written, completely written, and 5 of them have been published. And then I released a year ago a little sideways book that has a couple of stories, short stories. They're kind of like scary campfire stories. And so a couple of stories involve characters from my series. And so they're great books. I love them. They're nostalgic. So many people that have read them really dig them. They love that immersive feeling of going in and coming into another world, joining a family, so to speak. Obviously the series begins with Prelude to War, which is an ominous foretelling of the next book, which is Legends of War.
Right.
So, and in Prelude to War, I call that my foundation brick, in that I give the family history of the French Labars. They are plantation owners in Louisiana, and at one time they were gifted land by the King of France up in Canada, and then got kicked out in the 1700s. And so they made their way back down the coast of the United States and ended up in Louisiana area and became plantation owners. So you can obviously imagine what their history is. And I give just a brief back history through each of the books. It's like the family stories.
Right.
So everybody carries their generation and their legacy.
Fascinating. And in Legends of War, viewers and listeners, I don't want to give too many spoilers for this, but when I met Cris at this year's Festival of Books, I was blown away by the overall story of this Sparrow Wars in the Garden of Bliss book 2. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it just reminds me of like those very classic World War II movies of the 40s and the 50s. I really get that nostalgia feeling. And we'll be touching a little bit on that, the creation of the books, as well as the others in the series. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit more about you, Cris. So as your bio states, you're an author. You also play a lot of music. You have a lot of hobbies. You are a very creative person altogether. So I'm very curious, how did this creative identity come about for you growing up? And what sort of steered you towards the road of being an author?
I grew up with books. I have photographs of me as a baby and a toddler, always holding a book. My parents felt it was crucial in teaching me one about stories and telling stories, and then learning how to read. So by the
Mm.
time I was 3, I could read most of my books. Now, some of that was probably memorizing them, but I had the association and I was reading. By the time I was 4, I could read just about all of the books that you would hand to me. Might not understand them all, but I could read them. So there was this thing in that my father was at one time a history major in college,
Mm.
and he was also a fine arts major. He wanted to be an artist, and history was his thing. But he ended up getting called up and went to Korea. And
Mm.
when he went over there, he was actually the company historian and sort of a counter spy. They would creep across the front lines and take a picture of the front lines, and then he would have something to report. So his service for the year and a half in Korea left some serious marks for him. Some of it was he knew that he didn't ever want to have to be in war again. Two, he realized he got the traveling bug. He had grown up on a cattle ranch in Wyoming, the son of a Danish cattle dairyman, and his his life was very small. So going to Korea and traveling around the states, doing what he did in his service, he knew that he wanted to be a traveler. And that's what he set his life to do, was to be a world traveler and to every day learn something new. And so he and my mother instilled those things in me, to learn these things and to love and experience, the travel and reading, um, and things like that. So from a very early age, we used to tell stories, and he was a great storyteller and a big jokester. That's the Scandinavian Danish side of him. So he had fun, and I learned that skill. I learned that skill at a very early age. And then
Fascinating.
my art talents started to show up. I mean, as a young kid, I used to go to the beach and paint rocks, and people walk by and they go, "Oh, that's cool," and they buy it right off me. I come back with a pocket full of money. It's just, sort of a precocious kid, but at a very early age, I was doing art and I was already writing and telling stories. So it came very natural.
Fascinating. Now, what would you consider your aha moment when you realized you wanted to take your passion for writing and build upon it and make a career out of it as an author?
Uh, you know, when I was a young kid, as I said, I've had a lifelong love affair with books,
Hmm.
and especially growing up with the history and the family legacies of the stories. Those kind of things were fascinating to me. I didn't know that much about my father's family because they didn't talk much. When they immigrated to the States in the early 1900s, they became Americans right away, you know, and there was no telling about the old folks back there,
Right.
so they didn't even carry on their traditions. But my mother was a first and second generation uh, American, and she came from Slovak roots, which was different. And she actually imparted a lot of that stuff to me. I grew up in more of a Slovak environment, eating that kind of food and learning that stuff. So all of that kind of compiled in that I wanted to write the stories that were important. And really, I didn't write any of this stuff until 2009.
Mm.
I had a whole career stuffed in there for about 22 years, and other careers, from my life. But all of them seem to have touched upon having my art talent, skills in my art, and skills in writing. Sometimes I was a spec writer, or I'd be a a programmer, computer programmer, things like that. So it all kind of congealed. In 2000, I retired from
Mm,
that industry, and I floated around doing my artsy things, trying to find a niche, and was an editor and wrote newsletters for people. And in 2009, I was kind of floating free, and I said, you know what? I'm going to really dig in and find something good. And one night I had a dream, and it all started to flow out. And for about a month, these stories came to me every single night. They were lucid dreaming, and it was like a movie rolling in my head. And
right.
so I started writing those stories. And then I realized this isn't a book, it's many books, because it's the tale of a
Mm,
family and their generations. So um, I began researching for these people and developing the storylines and the plots. And within about 5 months, I had written basically the functions of 5 books. And then it was up to me to become better with it and go in what I call finding those historical pings, the things
right.
that make you feel like you're right there in that time and in that place. So I would look up radio stations or businesses that were around during that time, or things that people might have shopped, places they might have shopped at or used, even a gas station, things that brought their everyday life into a real time frame, and something that was not only nostalgic for people, but something that um, causes people to go, wow, I'm there. you know and that's something that people in general have, as my readers, have often really enjoyed, is that sense of coming home to family, that
Hmm.
sense of being somewhere else and fully immersed.
Nice. That's incredible, Chris. That is absolutely incredible. And I definitely get that from this book, book 2 in the Legends of War series. So let's actually talk about the series as a whole. So walk me through it with the first book in the series. You're at your desk, at your computer, or maybe you have a pen and paper, and you're jotting down the ideas of the book. What were sort of the goals you had as the author going into this series, as well as the promise you are making to your future readers?
Yeah. The promises for the reader is to give them an engaging book,
Mm,
something that um, not only brings them into another period of time, but also teaches them a little bit. It also defines the characters of the family and how
right.
their life lessons work. Because in Prelude to War, which is this big
Hmm.
honking brick, and it only looks big because it was printed in big format, but it actually it lays out the groundwork for all of that. And so I kind of charted and planned um, as I was writing, to tie all those things together and make them a cohesive story and plot. And initially the plot and the thread throughout the entire series of Sparrow Wars and the Garden of Bliss is about the generations of the Barre family,
Mm,
and the consequences of choices,
right.
and how it impacts family and friends and your life. And for Barton Barr, who is the charmed and cursed son, his family believes that they still are under the thrall of an ancient curse from the 1600s, and that every third son is either horribly cursed to fail, to die awfully, or to be the most wonderful person you ever want to meet and succeed, fantastically. But the downside of it is if they make the wrong decisions or hurt others or do things, they're going to fail miserably, and quite often the consequences take down the family too.
Mm.
So as we know, I mean, it's a little bit like being in a mob, that all your actions, there's a retro a retro effect that cascades then and kind of creates these problems and chaos. Barton Barr is one of those sons. He is a third son, and they particularly believe that if there are three continuous generations of third sons, maybe if everybody lives an exemplary life, then maybe Barton can break the curse once and
Mm.
for all. And what does he do? He's now in the war, which of course is the worst place for him to be.
Right.
Because they all fear, it's one thing if he had been drafted, but for him to volunteer and sign up with his buddies, and he discovers he soon discovers the error in his ways and how tough it is to be a soldier, and his father had written him a letter a month or so before he left for camp, and giving him ideas about how to change his life, how to guide himself, because he is one of these third sons, and also what life was like being a soldier.
Mm.
And his father really, really fears for him. So we have all of that in Legends of War. Legends of War also refers to not only, him being a hero or acting like a hero, or his father being a hero. It's the generations of wars that the majority of the people that are fighting now and demanding control or
Mm.
taking over and creating war were the same ones that fought in World War I. And maybe they were allies or enemies back then. Now things have changed. And so these are the legends of war, like Patton and
Right.
Hitler, almost all of those things. Winston Churchill. I write about the history with real sources and real feeling. And this ends up creating that forward momentum, but yet there's like a screwdriver running through the book and the series of this ominous foretelling that something bad is going to happen, and it's up to the family and to act accordingly and to try and survive all that's going on. So and Legends of War is the pivotal book in that just about all of Barton's actions come back to haunt him.
Mm.
And it also changes how the family lives in the books after, and the consequences of whatever he did during the war. So that's important.
All right. Fascinating. That's actually really, really good. And I like how you explained to us that this is like, a generational story with not just Barton as like the central character, but it's like his entire family itself is the character in this wider story. And that is, that can be at the beginning, that could seem as a daunting project to where it's like, how am I going to tell this generational story? Beginning, with the readers pick up this book and they start with Barton, like, how am I going to express to them, this is Barton's story in a much larger, grand scheme. And again, I don't want to spoil it too much, but you definitely hit the nail on the head. And since you definitely give readers a good jumping point to really explore this family and the curse that definitely consumes their lives. Now, when you began drafting this story and, establishing the timeline, at what point did you share with your own family and friends that you were embarking on this new adventure?
My husband knew it because I would end up waking up out of a dream and I'd sneak away and go into the study and get in my computer and start typing away what just went through my head, you know. So he would, you know, he was still working, so he would get up 3:30, quarter of 4 to get ready for work, and there I am still typing away for the last few hours. And you know, once he went off to work, then I would then I'd turn around and go back to sleep. Um, but yeah, I didn't really talk a whole lot about it, and by
Mm,
the time I really started to the series started to gel, and I had actually written kind of chapters and scenes and things, and was working to put them together for the various books, because something would come to me in the middle of the night and it's like, oh
right.
yeah, and so I'd write it, and so I was compiling all those, and like I said, within a few months I had created the basis for 5 books. So by that time, it was this, I started in 2009, and by that summer I started to share it with my mom,
Mm,
who had become an avid reader. And when I went to visit her, she lived in assisted living. She was very excited and wanted me to read something, a chapter from one of my books, or you know, a scene or something. And I chose one from Legends of War because that's what I was currently working on.
right.
Um, and it was the most evocative, um, and it was the story, that it was the letter that Richard gives his son to educate him in life and war. Um, and she just about turned purple, because it's, you know, it's violent, it's racy, you know, because he talks about the war, but then he also talks about the things that he did and his mistakes while there.
Mm,
And so some of it was a little salacious. And what was funny was, half the room was men and half the room were women, and they were all tuned in and just really digging it. And there was this one fellow over in the corner who had been kind of looking like he was sleeping, and I read his particular portion, and all of a sudden he woke up and he looked at me and he says, I like that. So he'd been sort of listening to that, and it turned out he was a veteran. He'd been
ah,
in the final days of World War II, and so this resonated deeply with him. And so he says, I want you to take my name and my number and give me that book when you're done. You know, so that made me feel good. My mother kind of, after it all, said, can't you write just a nice Christian book? You know, I mean, something that's wholesome and Christian. No, I'm sorry, Mom, I can't. Not right now, not in this series. And you know, the thing of it is that it's not all about war, but it's
no,
also the private wars, the things that we do to each other, um, the human frailties, and how we sometimes go against our you know, innermost feelings and do something rash. And that's definitely Barton. He is the loose canyon and the wild child, and he is more interested in gaining ground and pushing himself ahead,
right.
to be a winner, you know. And there are no losers in his family. You know, everybody is meant to be a winner, and yet they're not privileged at all. You know, even though his father Richard grew up on the plantation, they were still humble people. You know, I mean,
Right.
farmers are basically humble people, and he was of the land. So, you know, he brought up his kids, you know, with visits to the plantation, so they learned what a good day's work was. You know, and Barton wants to escape all of that. He wants to leave his family, his that life behind, and that's why he's excited about being able to travel and possibly going to his homeland of France, you know.
Mm,
So it's important. And Richard kind of gives him a challenge and a mystery. He says, if you happen to be blah blah blah, you know, see if you can find out what happened to these people, you know, find out you know, whatever happened. And so I won't reveal it, but it's a good story. And so, uh, you know, and then in the midst of this, while he's having a terrible and troubled life, you know, being a soldier and having to deal with all the things. Back home, his family is just kind of plodding along. They anxiously look forward to his letters. And at some point, they're like, yay, we finally got a letter. At least he was good. You know, he was safe and he was fine in January. And now it's April. Where is he? You know, what is he doing? You know, so those infrequent letters are important to everyone.
Right.
He has a pen pal friend that he meets, and there's auspicious timing in how he meets her. And Elise Boulanger lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She actually comes from a higher level of aristocracy, but again, because of the war, because of the Depression era, they have not bounced back. They have not recouped all their losses. So she doesn't really feel privileged or want to be part of that. She just wants to live every day and be happy every day. And so
Right.
she's his jeu d'esprit, you know, his little point of light in when she writes to him. And so that's a great development, those parallels between her life back home and his life.
Incredible. I love how you've really established the family lore as well as, you know, everyone's role in their own individual stories. And I also like how you mentioned that Legends of War is not just about the battles in the European theater, the major wars, but it's also the private wars of the individual people that everyone goes through, and just making it feel organic and natural. And this sort of leads to the next question, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Cris, which is, you know, as authors, when we embark on a new project, we spend years and years getting all the research in. As you've mentioned before, you really wanted this to feel authentic in terms of not just, you know, the battles that happened, but the clothes that people might have wore, what was the language like, music, radio. You want it to be as authentic to the time as it can be. And I applaud you for that. And it definitely shows in the book. And that leads, you know, to another discussion, which is, you know, as authors, when we work heavily on a project, there is that hesitancy of, do we share it with the world or do we just keep it to ourselves and our close family? Because as authors today in a digital age, there is this mindset where if you do publish it, yes, you are going to meet fellow and like-minded authors and readers, but you will also leave yourself exposed to a lot of the negativity which comes with social media, which can be very detrimental to an author's mental health and overall well-being. And of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be there, just waiting to strike. So I'm curious, Cris, when you began this series, and as you said before, that this wasn't just going to be a one-off book series, this is going to be a 13-book series, and you've already mentioned a good majority of the series has been written, just hasn't been published yet. At what point that have you ever had moments of either heightened anxiety and imposter syndrome? And what disciplined you to make that decision that this is going to be a 13-book series? Because doing a trilogy is already a commitment in of itself, but to actively say the story that I am creating, the characters that I am bringing to life deserve more than 3 books. I'm going to flesh this out as much as I can. 13 books, that is quite a commitment.
Right. You're absolutely right, Gabriel. I think originally it was 9 books, and I was in the idea of releasing them in 3s. So you actually would have had Prelude to War and Legends of War and Things of the Earth, which Things of the Earth is actually the 4th book.
Okay.
But when I went to publish, I discovered some rules and some things, and the thing of it is being an unknown and a first time out there with my books, they said a trilogy or working in threes like that, hardly anybody's going to buy it.
Right.
And the hope you're having is you're going to just find that it's going to be too difficult. So as when I put out, I had already created and published Prelude to War in 2013. So it took me 4 years to actually get up the guts and send it to a publisher and begin the process, you know. So by that time, I was ready to jump in for Legends of War. Now, Legends of War had a different look when I published because it was published, it was published in 2014. And its look was different because it was branded. I did a lot of the design, and so I did it was branded, so it goes, you know, when you put them on the shelf, they look like they belong together.
Right.
Okay, that was 2014. My first publisher that I had the book deal with turned it down, and it was because there was too much of real, true, factual stuff about the war, and the young people falling in love. They said they have to be 18 to 20. They can't be young teenagers falling in love. And I said, well, that's kind of weird because considering that how many, you know, women got married on the fly when their soldiers were getting ready to deploy, and they're getting married at 15, 16, 17 years old, you know, before their guy goes to war. And we know that's real.
Yes.
So, I rewrote Legends of War and turned it into another book, which ended up being this guy, I'm sorry, which is The Road Home. So parts of Legends of War and parts of Things of the Earth ended up in here.
Right.
So that's how you change, you know, I mean, because your publisher is asking for certain things and they want to be able to indulge you somewhat. And I realized that I have some weird habits. I mean, I'm new at this, and maybe not everything or the style or the way I'm trying to go is exactly workable, you know.
Right.
So hence this big monster book that looks like a textbook. And I get a lot of ding on it. So I always tell everybody, read it as an ebook. It's so much easier, you know. But here's the thing is what made me decide to step out of my comfort zone. And that was that the few people that I had shared little bits and pieces with it said that they really liked it. And just the fact that I was almost obsessed with these characters and the stories just continued to go and flow and the plots and everything, I said, this is something bigger. This is something better. And for me as an avid reader, for me to read something that I can reread 100 times and enjoy it and still feel surprised by it and the craft in it, I said, this is something that I think others will enjoy.
Right.
And I was right. I was right. A lot of people liked it. And, you know, they just didn't like the big size. But as it came out, Legends of War ended up being the most popular. And it was because it was, you know, in 1928 in Prelude to War, we meet Barton as a little boy. He's 5.5. And now in Legends of War, which is a legend, the next generation goes to war. And so that's the backline of that is that his father served in Europe in World War I, and now his son is going. And so that's, you know, that thread that winds through. And, you know, doing his duty, his patriotic duty, even though he really doesn't want to, he's there, you know, he's there. So that was kind of my aha moment. Get me out of the closet. I'm not going to be a closet writer anymore. I'm going to let the world see my work for what it is. And, you know, put it out there for the world. And there are parts that I almost feel like I have to apologize, because anybody who really knows me knows that I'm very honest about a lot of things, and they know that I have a deep heart and deep emotions.
Mm.
But then to write about certain things or certain possibly salacious details is not, people don't really think of me like that. And it's like, oh, they're going to think I'm a weirdo or wacko. And when there's this joke going around for a while that when you use the internet to look up books or to look up details or whatever, sometimes the things that you have to look up, to be able to describe a sound or how
Right.
this thing works, makes you look like a wackadoodle. And like for you, Gabriel, you do your historian stuff with your Romans, and what is all their pieces of armor
Yeah.
and their weapons that they use, and you want to be able to describe them accurately. So I do the same. I mean, I was looking up armaments that they would have used during the war, and that different levels of officers or people, what kind of things they would have used, what their K rations were,
Yeah.
Things like that, just so that I can describe them and give them just that one moment. It might take me an hour to find information or to read about it somewhere. And then, but it's something that I learned,
Mm.
and that's the big thing, is learning. Is you constantly are learning and refining your craft when writing. And I learned that after every single book and every single research, I learned something new and how to do it better,
Absolutely. That is incredible, Cris. And this kind of leads into another discussion that I like to hear your thoughts on, which is this debate of whether or not in today's climate, are we in a renaissance or golden age for authors? And the reason I bring this up is that there have been many guests I've had on the show who have stated that the COVID years, the lockdown years, sort of was a breeding ground for new authors to really emerge. And while that is true, I was one of them who emerged during the lockdown years. It begs the question of, is that true? Are we in a golden age or a renaissance for authors, specifically independent authors or authors in general? And some say that we are, some say that we are not. And some have even gone further and said that while the publishing industry has changed, and it was already changing within the last 20 years, the books that emerged from the lockdown years, while they exist, were not solely created with the drive of passion behind them, if that makes sense. So, in your opinion, Cris, do you feel that we are in a golden age of authors, or we are entering a renaissance, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a tough analogy, because politically, we know that there are a lot of authors' books who have been banned. And these are, some of them are classics that we grew up reading in school,
Right.
or reading as children, and now all of a sudden it's not cool to read that or to share that, and they're taking them from the library. And when I think about it, my books are not politically correct either, because I write truthfully with the mindset of the society and the people of the time and the era. And so, somebody saying something derogatory, talking about the enemy, some people take great offense to that.
Right.
Because we try not to do that today. But here's the thing, is that it was done then, and it's always done. And I hate to have the name labels and the biases and things like that, and that prudish thoughts. But people weren't that way.
Yeah.
And so for me to write about that, I am concerned in that people will take offense. And it does open me up to some ridicule and saying, oh, you called that person the N-word, or you call, it's not my belief. It's not how I would do things, but it's how it was the time, and for somebody to be derogatory to someone because maybe they were poor or offbeat. Yeah. And as far as being a, a golden age or a renaissance, I think maybe I think maybe it's coming around a little bit more towards a renaissance because of the entertainment industry and the writers strike and the actors and the movies industry, the publishing industry. All of those have changed so greatly, and especially since 2013 when I first published. I mean, everything is different now. um, all of that leads me to think that, okay, there are people who maybe have always wanted to write a book, but because they had to have a living, they chose to be a writer for somebody else, a screenwriter or a script writer, or just writing the dailies for a show, whatever it was. But that COVID thing did help some people to uncover some of their talents and maybe publish. And I agree with you that quite a few of the books that came out, Gabe, during that time were a little on the dark side and a little flat.
Right.
There is less emotion, and I think maybe it's a lot of it was fear. But the pandemic really put the fear of, I mean, this is a plague by God, some people believed, and, ethnic cleansing or whatever, I mean, people really bought into that kind of thing. And so there were these others kind of going and said, well, I don't have a job, so I might as well write my book.
Right.
And, I kind of did the same thing. I mean, I'm retired, so I can write whenever I want. But I did the NaNoWriMo Challenge, the National Novel Writing Month. I did it during that time and redeveloped some of the stuff that I had been writing all along for some of the other challenges and turned it into, some of these little books, and so it sparked my creativity. The other thing that came out of COVID was that here were these very talented people sitting at home and knowing that they need to do something with their mind. And we had a whole new level of the podcasts,
Yes.
funny videos, I mean, there was just a plethora of things. And, I was on Facebook, and it was a way to connect with my followers and my friends and family. And, there was some really great stuff. And I used to pal around with a lot of actors and theater people. And I used to be part of a theater group at one time. And so all these people were sitting there going, what am I going to do? And so they made a little money, doing their videos and doing their crazy things. And it was great. It was great. And so much innovation came out, and it reminded me, and I even write about it, it reminded me of World War II, when the whole world came together to help fight whatever enemy was there, or to help each other. And, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, everybody jumped in to help the widows or the orphans, or there was that global sense of emotion that you have to do more. And that is actually the driving force in my books, is that you always have to stand up in some way. You always have to take a side and see both sides. The good and the bad and the ugly. You have to be able to navigate those and find some kind of happiness, find some kind of solution for you, maybe, or your family, or maybe your job, and that's what I started to see a little bit coming from the pandemic time. So I would say it's a renaissance. There's some, especially in the war books, there has been so much that has been declassified, and that includes some of the content that is in my book. In that I had written stuff, and just it was my idea, and then it turns out something was declassified, and so I happened to see it just shortly before publishing, and so I turned some of those passages around and let them be something that was had some fact to it,
Right.
some history to it. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
And speaking on the topic of publishing, that perfectly segues now into the business side of being an author. So that's a little icebreaker, Cris. How much research did you really dive into to figure out what path was best for you? Either, going the route of an indie author, hybrid author, or traditional author. So how much research did you really put time in to really figure out what path worked best for you?
Yeah, I actually did quite a bit. I was a little bit daunted by the traditional publishers because I believed that in a way they might not allow my book to live.
Right.
They would shut me down on many things, and I wanted it to be as honest and real. And that series is definitely about that honesty and realism and finding truth, standing up, and it's not politically correct. And I felt that some of the traditional publishers would so I went with being an indie. And so most of this series I did as an indie author, which means that if you want to play, you have to pay.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
And that's why there was also a lull for several years, even though I was still writing and I still wanted to publish. I just couldn't afford to keep moving forward, and find a publisher that was willing to, take me on. So yeah, I did a lot of research. And like I said, the industry has changed so greatly that still, if you want to be with being an indie or being a hybrid, you have to have some great marketing skills. You have to this is your business and you work it every day. And sometimes I will be honest, I got a little disgruntled and a little disappointed going, I'm sick of this. What am I going to post today? It's you're trying to be positive about things. And yet it's like, I wondered, I began to self-doubt myself that, maybe my books aren't as great, or maybe what the blurb that I have on it is not interesting enough, And so as I was working through those years of publishing, I learned stuff every single time. And I began to get to the point where I said, I can do this on my own. I just need somebody to be able to print and distribute.
Right.
And so that's where it comes into other businesses that have come out of the woodwork, and you have to be very, very careful. Because it's still, if you want to play, you have to pay.
100%. And with that in mind, let's also talk about the audience and the readership. And then for me, I've always viewed these as two separate entities, and a lot of my guests definitely agree. Now, for those who are just joining us for the very first time, the audience is the general market that it's drilled into us as authors that we need to market to. But that may not work for a lot of us. Some of us will probably market our books to a specific style of readership, or particular readership, where it's like, people like us, or people who enjoy similar stories like us. And if we look at the categories, break it down even further, you have middle grade, YA, NA, and AF. And each of those categories has its own set of expectations and readership that the author really has to understand. So for you, Cris, would you consider yourself an author who writes for the target audience or for the specific readership that you have a good idea of?
Yeah, when I first started the series, I kind of was writing it I wrote it for my stepbrother, the first book, because he and I used to read and we liked that sense of nostalgia. And again, it was sort of a baby boomer thing. Here we are telling stories that somebody might have heard from their parents and their grandparents.
Right.
And so it was kind of a baby boomer book, baby boomer and all the way back to the builders generation. So 3 generations, that it was kind of target. But the thing of it is, it's not pigeonholed that way. It moves past that. And so anybody who is an adult reader is welcome to read it. I mean, anybody. And I think that they will get the engaging story, and be join the family, the Barre family. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and I kind of wrote it a little bit for me, because some of these, it's a cross genre series. Each book has numerous genres and tropes. And this
Mm,
is a new word I learned as I'm you know learning about marketing and all the metadata that you have to put up there. Um, and it was very hard for me to assimilate all that information, pull it out of what I wrote. I know every detail, but what does that mean? Kind
right.
of a thing. So you learn as an author, you can either be just let somebody guide you and just do it all for you, which is not a problem, and most authors do that. Or you can be where you learn the craft, and while you're learning, you're honing your skills, and you are becoming smarter, so that you can negotiate deals, and you can negotiate how you want this book to come out in public. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so yeah, um, it's definitely that way. Legends of War in the beginning does have a dedication, and I kind of wrote it at the time, thinking of my stepmother, Lily, who was French, and she lived in France during the German occupation.
Mm,
So she really had this mind block about, throughout her entire life, she could not learn German to save her life. Yet
wow.
she was so brilliant, and she spoke 5 languages fluently. She had traveled the entire world, I mean, going to places back in the 40s and the 50s, post-war, where women should not go, and doing
Right.
jobs that were unique. So she was an inspiration for me to be bold, to step out of your comfort zone, your box, and to press forward. Say what you feel, say what you think, and if people don't like it, that's on them. If, as long as it's not offensive or anything like that. But she was French, and so she had a lot of different mannerisms and a lot of different ways of
Mm.
points of view. Yet she had an artistic and creative spirit, and so she actually inspired me to continue my writing. And when I told her that I was actually writing and dedicated, she said, "Oh no, please, no, don't dedicate it to me." She was so humble; she didn't want anything. And I said, "Yes, because you truly inspired me in my teenage life and my college and professional life. That you were able to do all these wonderful things." And she was a handicapped person, physically handicapped. She lost her arm in a train wreck, a train that got bombed, during the war. So for her to continue being this free and powerful woman was inspiring for me. And I said, I have to kind of emulate her. I have to learn how to be that way, and not just take things as they come. And it helped me develop myself and develop my writing.
And that kind of leads perfectly into the next question, Cris, which is, establishing our identity as authors, because I think that's among the many things that we authors have to go through. It's really trying to figure out what kind of writer do we want to be. And it's this balancing act of our individuality while like, also respecting the genres and the books that came before. Because, as you've mentioned before, this book and the other books in the series are cross genre. They can be read by anyone from any genre, and that is incredible. And I definitely think that leads to the discussion of, how do we make a book in a set genre where it is different from the norm, but still familiar? Because I'm sure you would definitely agree, Cris, that each
Hmm.
genre has its expectations for its readers
Hmm.
that has to be met. And I know every author, all the works have say, write the book that you want to write. That is true. But you also have to understand the genre that you're getting into. You
Hmm.
don't want to make it too original that's going to lose the reader's interest, but you don't want it to be a carbon copy of something that's already been written,
Exactly.
because we don't want to be like anybody else. Yes, it's nice when people make those comparisons on their own, but that shouldn't be the author's driving force. Like they want to be
Mhm.
the next George R. R. Martin, the next J.K. Rowling, the next anyone. It should just be themselves. Because when someone opens your book, they should be hearing your words, your voice, not anyone else. So for you, Cris, how have you been able to balance these two, and what have you learned from that?
Yes, yes, that's very true, Gabriel. Um, I've had to kind of like suck up a little pride in that, in saying that I write what I write. I write, I create chaos, but then I help my characters try to find a sense of joy and peace, maybe fall in love during that
Mhm.
chaos. And that is definitely evocative of the series of Sparrow Wars and the Garden of Bliss, in that the sparrows are these innocent people, like the innocent people that were affected during all of these wars, um, that lost their lives because of, whatever.
Right.
Um, and those kind of things, and here they are having their little life, and no matter how good or bad it is, it's their life, and all of a sudden the ravens of war come in to steal it away or to take it or power over them, these kind of things. And that was the sense that I got from my stepmother, was how powerless she felt,
Mm.
in that these people, if you tried to rebel in any way, shape, or form, you were shut down, you were killed, so having that freedom taken away was a real soul-sucking thing for her. And that's the kind of thing I like to write about, is that it it allows people to find that little bit of happiness, simple thing, whether it's feeding your baby, or the fact that you have food today and everyone's going to eat it,
Right.
no, you know so that those sweet, simple little joys, um, are the things that make my book different, and that make it feel real and emotional, um,
Mhm.
and drives people to feel maybe empathy for the
Right.
time, or feel joy knowing that these people are still fighting. The Barre family, when they were in France, back in the 1600s, they had a family motto that was, "We fly with the winds."
Mm.
And once they came to America and had discovered all the things that they could do and could not do, they and loss of fortunes, and losing things in the war up in Canada, um, they changed their family motto to "Nous sommes contre les vents." We fly against the winds.
Ooh.
So it became their motto to do more than some people might have to do, not just stand by and watch things happen, to step up. you
Right.
and to be assertive in what you need and what you want, and how to rectify the problems, and possibly and hopefully with peace, with a peaceable action, not turning it around to war. There is a very famous Latin term that I use in one of my books. In fact, it's coming up in the Chacha in the Dark from from Cuba with Love, and
Mhm.
the Latin term is, "If you come here seeking peace, you will go away in war."
Ooh. That's a really
So there
powerful
you go,
phrase.
and that's kind of that drive that the sometimes people, the bars have to go through. If you're going to create a big stink, well, then this is it. So as far as my books being comparable to others, um, during the time that I was writing the majority of these books, I didn't
Mhm.
do anything. I didn't want anybody else's book to infiltrate my mind or to influence anything. So, being an avid reader, I'm used to reading, 1 to 3 books a week.
Right.
So having having said that, one of the greatest inspirations I found was Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series.
Yes.
And her style of writing, of being so personal, even in the everyday things of how to use the bucket, or how to use, this thing, or making a cup of tea, those are the kind of things that I draw into my books, of making it that this is a big effort, but this is what you did every day because this was something that was meaningful for them, or part of their daily habit. And she shows the ugly side of life, the dirty side of life. Can you imagine back then having to change baby diapers and then trying to clean them and deck, and now we have things that we just throw away, Back then, everything you had to use. And so that's the same kind of thing. I said, if she is brave enough and has guts enough to write these kind of things that are a little bit shocking, definitely revealing, and then driving it that it's not a big deal. This is what you do. And then, of course, the fabulous love story that erupts from, between her and Frank, and then her and Jamie, and the dedication and loyalty that she has between the two men, because of the time frame. So she actually inspired me the most, and so I didn't want to write like her, but I wanted to infuse those kind of details. The other influence for me was Michener. I loved James Michener's book. And if you ever read most of them, they start with a little thing, a rock, a monument, a thing, that then in this time frame, this is what it evolves into and becomes in other times this thing, this whatever it is,
Right.
For example, Centennial, there's a little mini cave inside the riverbank, and so they have they have these stories, to count that little history of that silly little cave in the riverbank that otters and beavers used and things like that. And all of a sudden in the 1800s, it's used to stow a body. So things like that is what I like, is putting those little clues, those little omnipresent things that are going to give you a little foreshadowing towards a something that's coming. So that's how my books are slightly different, in that, there's just that level of detail and realism and care.
Right. That's actually well said, Cris. Well said. And we now arrive at the final question of this incredible author's interview. So this is a very loaded question, so I will definitely give context to this. So I've been doing this show for about 6-7 years, and I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of authors, from indie, hybrid, traditional, and you break that down even more, aspiring, debuting, upcoming, academic, writers who write as a hobby. Haven't had any poets on the show yet, but there's a first time for everything. And I've learned so much. And I wanted to create this show, among the many reasons, to not only give authors a platform to showcase their work, but to also provide insight for viewers who are watching this, who are authors themselves or writers themselves, and want to learn secrets, tips, and tricks, and overall the truth about the industry. And there's a lot of stuff that does need to be shared. So imagine this scenario, Cris. Let's say you were invited to host a workshop. And in that workshop, you are telling a group of young aspiring writers the truth about the publishing industry. And that is, in the industry, there is no guarantee you're going to be a financial success. It's not going to be easy. Are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. But that's the thing.
Right.
Those are the exceptions. And generally speaking, the average author is not going to sell the 100 copies, 1,000 copies, whatever. And also, as authors, there are two kinds of authors. those who are and those who wish to be known. Those who are authors are people who dedicate themselves to the craft. Those who wish to be known as authors commit themselves to the business side. They lead up to the same end goal, which is, of course, success. But unfortunately, as I've learned through my numerous interviews, the second path is the most enticing and leads to a lot of unrealistic goals and expectations. So here is the question. How would you teach that hypothetical workshop with those hypothetical students to let them know that this is the reality of the publishing industry, but if you understand your goals and they are realistic goals, you are going to do exceptionally well in this industry?
How would I teach that? That's a good question. One of the things that I have discovered on my journey as a writer, especially since 2009, is to maybe surround yourself with, or at least follow people who are writers who are popular. Okay.
Right.
You don't have to necessarily be a fan, but watch how they market, watch what they do. You know, when you think about it, James Patterson, for example, has a great example in that he is well known. His books, I mean, he's written hundreds of books, and his books are worldwide, and he's sold millions and millions of copies. So you can imagine how he's reaped the growth there. But when you see him, he's just so down to earth and quiet, and he holds up his book and he says, "La la la la, buy my book, please." That's his ad. That's his ad, and it's been on TV, it's on Facebook, it's on other places, and sometimes we go to great lengths to try and create like a little mini movie or a mini ad that shows what's in the book. And of course, we don't want to give away special things like we've talked about. There are special things in the book that, you want to entice people and get them to pick up that book, buy it, and read it.
Right.
That's the biggest draw is being an author. You need to learn a little bit about the marketing. You need to learn a little bit about the publishing industry,
Yes.
Whether you do it yourself. And there, I have followed so many workshops and so many people watching like Zoom video business things, where they're supposedly teaching you how to make money or how to market your book, and when it comes down to it, it's their style, it's their product, and you're paying into that. And I never do, but I take the ideas away from it, from the workshop, and try to apply them in ways that I can. And so that's probably a good thing. There are a lot of people out there who make you believe that they're there for your good, that are going to help you. And maybe they will ultimately in the end, but it comes down to you being the wise one, and do not be afraid.
Yes.
Let your thoughts and ideas flow, no matter how farched or dark themed. Books are the reflection of life, our secrets, fears, wars, loves, jealousies, and hope. And then the best thing I can tell these people is get yourself a really good editing app that helps you refine your book. So one of the things that fails so many authors is they send in a manuscript and it's poorly formatted. It uses weird fonts. It's not consistent looking. And then there's typos and grammar errors everywhere. Within one page, those people that are possibly going to look at your book will toss it in the pile and say, nope. And it's just that way. And nowadays, it seems like you have to have an agent to present your work to a publishing company. So when it comes down to it is, what kind of book are you writing? If it's just your memoirs and you want it to go out to 100 people, then just use an indie publisher. Okay. If
Mhm.
it's something that's big like this series, I started with indies and I was just curious to see how well it would fly, you know. And obviously there's big interest, but yet the sales and the reviews, and don't be disappointed if somebody says, yeah, I read your book, it was good. Well, give it a review, please, you know.
Yes, please.
Most people do not review anything. I try to review every book that I read, and I put it up on Goodreads. So in general, I read between 75 and 100 books a year. So that's the other thing is, as a writer, maybe find books that are similar to yours in genre or plots, and read somebody else's work. And then you take away this internal critique of, well, mine is better, or mine is, ugh, I really need to work on this still, before you ever try to publish. Okay. It's a good idea. Also, the other thing that I have discovered, and it's very weird, it's a weird thing, is if you have a Kindle or an e-reader, send your manuscript to yourself, uh, and read it line by line, then read it like a book. If it works, then, and you don't find errors, or, you know, you go back and you can fix the errors. But if you find that the formatting looks good, that it reads well, you don't find any typos or weird things, then run it one more time through your editing app, and then go ahead and try publishing. And there's so many ways to publish. But like, again, like I say, is all of them involve your level of help. You know, quite often they ask you to write what the series is about, the synopsis, the tagline, the log lines, all these things. And if you're not hip to what those phrases mean, and what are your tropes, what are your genres, educate yourself in those things, and look up, if you have to, look up books on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, books that you, and see how they're listed. And then you can go and say, okay, my book is like that. It deals with this subject matter. So there is a thing that is you can go to, which gives you kind of need to be a member, but you can still go and look up stuff where it gives you all the genres. And it gives you the codes in order to give that metadata of what is that book really about. And so when it gets advertised on, like, for example, Amazon, somebody goes to Amazon, and this is the best thing I'm going to do for you guys, is when you go to Amazon, you look up, okay, a book about World War II, okay, novel, fiction, okay, those are the first three things. But then you go there and there's 1,000 books, okay, and mine should be in there somewhere. But then if you want to refine it, you know, and you say, okay, I want a romance in there, I want it to be about a family, so you add those extra tags, and all of a sudden you may find your book that you've written, or find the book that, you know, appeals to you. So use those as examples of how to build your metadata, because everybody's going to ask you for it, and you don't always want to leave it up to the publisher to put it in, because, for example, this last time in the 10th anniversary of Legends of War, it was also listed as a coming of age novel. Right away, it tags it that it is now an audience of 13 to 18-year-olds.
Oh,
which is
no.
absolutely
Nope.
Nope. So be careful what you choose, you know, and like I said, go through and find books that might be similar to yours. Read their synopsis if you don't want to read the whole book. Just get an idea. Those are the best tools that you can teach yourself and to help yourself. Then when you actually feel like you can go and publish with somebody, if you don't go to a traditional publisher, if you go through an indie or a hybrid, it gives you a step up in that you're talking the same language as they are. You have a refined piece, and it's up to them to create it and make it make it look good and make it into a book, format it for a book. And you always have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like this style of font. I don't like this picture on the cover. I don't like this or whatever, whatever. It's not what you envision. Be sure they give you forms. Be sure you tell them what you envision and the mood and the tone that you're going for. And then of course those genres and the tropes.
Yes.
Be smart and wise in that kind of stuff, because when I first started publishing, all I knew was this is a book about war and love and family. It's a family saga. That's all I have. And yet it's like 10 things, So just be smart and educate yourself and continue to hone your craft.
And to add on to that, as a last thing, network too. Networking is huge for authors. That really does help us in a sense that, especially if you go an independent route as an author, definitely network, find your team, which could be like your editor, your cover artist, a marketing manager, someone that's really good with, getting readers to beta read and ARC read. Definitely build that rapport, because it's definitely those people who are going to be crucial to you. And in turn, you could also help them out too, like help promote their business, their services. Because at the end of the day, being an author is not just a one-person job. It's a business. It's a small startup if you really think about it, because a lot of moving parts definitely bring a book all together. And with that, we end this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Cris for making her official debut here on the show. Cris,
thank you, Gabriel.
You're welcome. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect with you, as well as people can buy your book?
Yeah, my books, you can find them all on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and Ingram Spark. But you can also go to the individual publishing houses like Archway, iUniverse, Book Baby, and my latest, which is Scripter House Publishing. And on those sites, you can buy the books there. I just want to let people know that when you release your books, you think of that wonderful royalty. I'm going to sell 100 books, within a week. But when it comes down, you end up with this much instead of this much.
That's true.
And that's because everybody takes a cut. So if you can, one of the tricks is if you can eliminate some of the hands grabbing in the cookie jar by going directly to your publishing site, and they will always have a bookstore and your book will always be there. If you are doing publishing through somebody like Barnes and Nobles or KDP, Amazon, you will have your own author page, and do that, build your author page, and you can sell your books from that way. And so they take a little bit less of a cut. So know that. And as far as finding me, Google me. I'm going to be running an ad campaign on Google and Instagram soon for Legends of War. And even though it's sort of a new version of it, it's a new version 2024, and it was auspicious for the 80th year of Operation Overlord D-Day, which about a quarter of the book is dedicated to that, that history, and Barton is involved in that. So as far as finding me, I'm on Facebook. Put in C.A. Portnellus and you'll find me somewhere. I have a couple pages. And then also Garden of Bliss books. You can find me under that. And I have websites. So just, type my name in and it'll take you to probably 20 different places where you can find me or you can find my books. So.
All right. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you again to Cris for coming on the show and making her official debut here on the show. We wish her the very best with this series. And we hope to have her back again on the show very, very soon in the foreseeable future. Make sure to like,
Thank you,
comment,
Gabe.
and subscribe. You're welcome, Chris. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the next episode later this week.